So welcome everybody for this webinar about flax fibers and external bonding reinforced concrete strengthening. I will present today work done in Université Lyon and University of Salerno in collaboration with Professor Enzo Martinelli. So this work is part of a large project, Projet Fiabina. It's a large project devoted to promote the use of flax fibers, natural fibers, in the field of composites materials. So we found some applications in for automobile, aircraft, and large panels of large area. So flax fibers are natural fibers and can be compared to some industrial one that we all know, such as carbon, aramid, or glass fibers. And the question we had a few years ago was to think about using these natural fibers instead of these well-known industrial fibers to strengthen structures for flexure, shear, or confinement. And this was the aim of our research in this project. So flax fibers, if we compare it to usual fibers, may be mainly compared to glass. If we look to the 10 specific modulus, they are very light, little bit less high with about the young modulus, but the specific strength are very high. Then, of course, they are less toxic and more friendly for ecology, since they are natural and they are produced very easily. Nowadays, these kind of fibers are already used. There are some companies in France promoting this use in automobile, electronic device, some domestic use also, and sports area. And our aim was to think about using in the field of construction. So flax fibers can be good also are used already for insulation in this field. For doors or windows profile, they are very light, used with thermoplastic matrix. But for structural applications, there is not so many used in this field. These natural fibers are very specific and are already well known, for example, by Ballet in the literature review. They are maybe compared with wood fibers. They are cellular fibers, and this will modify their mechanical properties, and we will see this later in the webinar. For example, if we compare to glass fibers, stress-strain curves are not linear. They are mainly bilinear. First stage where the fibers rearrange themselves with a higher young modulus, and then the second stage where the young modulus is more or less constant. So for the next, all the properties are given in this second stage, where the mechanical properties are nearby and the same. And these have been well identified in literature, where several authors have clearly shown that the mechanical properties of those fibers can be compared and obtain this kind of typical curves. Then, what we've seen about the first part of the test we developed in the lab was to confirm this about this two-stage of behavior for the flax fibers, and we also obtained several interesting results that I will develop. What we have studied first is a combination of different fabrics, very light fabrics, higher weight fabrics with 600 grams per square meters, and then UD fibers also were tested. All these fibers have been prepared by the Dons company in north of France, where the flax fibers quality is very nice. All those fibers have been applied by hand layup method, and the global amount of volumic fiber content is 15 to 30%. This is some photos about how the fibers looks like, and what we get at the end is a young modulus about 11 gigapascal and a tensile strength about 170 megapascal. You observe here that some debonding may occur of those fibers, and this obliges us to use two epoxy systems, one with a high viscosity and one with a low viscosity, allowing to bond this onto concrete. If we use some specific way in order to look what the composite looks like, what you can observe is that due to the hand layup method, there is a lot of voids into the composites, but you can also observe that many of the fibers are impregnated by the resin thanks to this system of two polymers. The first one which impregnate the fibers, and the second one which allows to bond the fibers onto the concrete. So here you have several epoxy systems that we have tested in order to get different layer and optimize the best one. And this was at the end the best system that we from which we get the mechanical properties, the higher one. So this is mainly the different tensile strength. One first objective was to, depending on several layers, compare the different strength we may have. What we observed is that we had tensile strength nearby 150 megapascal and the young modulus about 15 gigapascal. So in first conclusion, what we can observe is that flax fibers may be more or less compared to glass fibers properties, and then if we observe here is very light glass fibers, about 200 grams per square meters, and compared to the flax fibers composite we have in our study. Next stage was to evaluate how these flax fibers can be bonded onto concrete using this specific two matrix polymer used in our research. So we use a typical double lap shear test, and we obtain shear in function of bond slip. We can observe the local strain distribution, and then we compare this to usual local bond slip model obtained in literature. What we can say is that more or less the behavior is very, very similar to the one that we can obtain with glass or carbon fibers, just the mechanical properties may change. For example, what we compare is the ultimate load in function of the experiments we have, and compare this to the different model proposed in literature. Of course, we have to fit this since mechanical properties are a little bit different, but if we fit this, we are able to get more or less a very nice calculation of the ultimate load. These have been already published by Alonnet, one of my PhD students in Composite Part B, and this is the title of the presentation. The title of the paper, sorry, you may find all the detail about these experiments. So, to conclude of this first introduction, what we can say is that properties of flax fibers, if you develop well, the composites may be very nice and comparable to the one that we have with glass. That bond is not a real problem on concrete, and we can develop higher level of strength onto the concrete and low level of sliding, and so the behavior may be very interesting. So next stage may be to do the tests at the scale level of the structure. So in a second PhD, what we've done is a first study about shear strengthening. So we used two specific system, a rectangular section and a T section, in order to evaluate the variability. On this, we have tested several different specimens, different spacing of the flax fibers, different width, and also a continuous strengthening, and we'll compare this to the carbon method. So for this, you all know that there is different strengthening system, and in our study, we mainly focus on this continuous strengthening and continuous strengthening. We didn't focus on with different inclination or NSM techniques. So more details about the specimen we test. Then 10 beams, 2 meter span have been tested, loaded in this way, such as we have a high level of shear loading in this area and less in this one, so that the shear failure occur here. And you have all the details about the strengthening in this slide. Of course, more detail can be obtained if you just send me an email. We also evaluate the T section. So for this one, it was 2.5 meter span. And the idea was to see about the problem of debonding and to get a depth, higher depth beam in this area. So as a result, if we compare from the reference one and the strengthening one, what we can observe is that if we have continuous strengthening, the increase in strength is more or less very interesting, about 30% of increase. But if this continuous strengthening is used with a very light, only one layer, the amount of increasing in ratio is very low. And for T section, what is very interesting is to see that again, this is the unstrengthened specimen with a brittle behavior, and this is the strengthened one with an external bonding with a thickness of 3 millimeter of the flax fibers and also a width of 180 millimeter. What is interesting is to see that we obtain a very ductile behavior. The shear failure was not an issue anymore in this strengthening, and that we increase about 40% of the ultimate load capacity of this beam. So all the results may be summed up in this slide. You observe here in some way when the level of strengthening was too high, we didn't get the shear failure and we get the flexural one. But in most of the cases, we obtain the shear failure as expected. And in some cases where the strengthening is very light, what we get is very low level of increasing of load, less than 10%. Some photos about the shear failure. You can observe here the cracking, specific shear cracking we have in different specimens. And one thing that is very nice to see is that we didn't get flax debonding, but we've been able to get the failure in tension of the flax fibers. We then compare these results with the different one coming from literature, using CSA or SEI or FIB or CNR bulletin, and the failure we expect to get with the flax fibers using the mechanical properties. And in any case, more or less only with the FIB bulletin, the estimation is very nice. With this calculation method, the load expected is higher than the one we get really in experiments. But in most of the case, generally, the level of load is calculated as the one we have with carbon fibers. So in order to better understand how that strain are distributed in the flax fibers, we use a DIC method in the cracking area. In this way, we are able to get strain and stress curve for different level of load and obtaining in that way the different cracking pattern. So what you observe here is we compare this also with strain gauges locally bonded onto the FRP system. And what you observe is that cracking propagates very nicely under the flax fibers, and then at the end we obtain the failure of the strip in this area where the tensile properties are the higher. To compare this, we developed some finite element modeling using the plates for the composite area. The reinforced concrete beams was considered to be modeled using ANSYS software and with internal reinforcement and smart concrete crack approach. And in this case, we were able to model the crack, which was more or less very comparable to the one obtained experimentally. And you can observe here also the large strain we have with the experiment. So with the strips, again, you can have here the comparison between the experiment and the modeling. Means that it allows to get a high level of stress we have. So to conclude on this second stage of our research, what we can observe is that for shear strengthening, the use of flax fibers is very efficient. You can have a very high important increase of the loading capacity and can solve the problem of shear for some reinforced concrete beams strengthening. Third stage of our research, and this part was done in collaboration with Enzo Martinelli in Salerno University, was to evaluate the efficiency of such flax fibers for reinforced concrete walls for seismic retrofitting. The idea was to use such kind of fibers so that we can replace carbon one for walls that are loading by compression and cyclic loading. So 6 walls was tested for carbon fabrics using carbon fabrics external bonding to the concrete. Anchor was placed in order to ensure the continuity of force between the wall and the basement. And for shear wall, small wall was tested in order to be able to propagate shear failure instead of flexural one. 6 wall was tested with different configuration of carbon fabrics bonding onto the support. For the flax fibers, we compare the use of 3 walls. There were 2 that have longitudinal reinforcement at the end of the wall, with two, three horizontal strip in order to avoid shear failure. And the third one was just strengthened by GFRP sheet on the entire support of the wall. And we, in addition, placed 2 strips at the end made of flax fibers in order to increase the flexural capacity and the shear in the both time. For the small wall, we only use 1. And as you can see, because the properties are lower than the one of carbon fabrics, what we observe is that we have to put more flax fibers onto the support. Then, testing device is already well known. The loading procedure is quite usual for this kind of test. We increase progressively the displacement. The load is displacement control with a speed of 100 millimeters per minute. Then a vertical load is applied, hydraulic jack load to control the vertical one, and a horizontal load is applied cyclically. Then this is the results we have typically if we look only at the maximal load and displacement for each level of hysteresis curve. If we compare the results from, this is the reference specimen, you can observe a very brittle failure, mainly due to longitudinal cracks in flexure appearing in the basement of the wall. And when the wall is strengthened with FRP, carbon, you can observe a very important increase in the horizontal load capacity. And this increase, compared with the flax fibers, is very nice. And we'll see that is also interesting for dissipation capacity. At the end, we obtain a capacity thanks to a horizontal load, which is twice in comparison with the reference specimen. For the short walls, the increase is lower, but the load is very high. And we obtain 35% in increase in shear, but what we get in this wall is a very prematurated failure at the basement with a sliding of the wall between the wall and the basement, so we didn't get the real full shear capacity of the wall. Then to compare with carbon, as I mentioned, you can observe that carbon wall were here, and the one in green was the one strengthened by flax fibers. And what you can see is that it's very interesting since we have an important increase in load, but also in displacement capacity, in compression and in tension, because we have push and pull tests. So the test is very, very nice, and it's much more nicer than the one obtained with carbon. In carbon test, we have some buckling of the carbon due to the important Young modulus of the carbon. In this specimen, what we've seen is that the debonding did not occur, and we have very nice behavior until the failure. So this is the comparison for shear failure. What we can observe here is, again, the comparison is that it's very comparable to the one obtained with carbon fibers. And so in conclusion, the flax fibers may be comparable more or less to the carbon one. If we expect to calculate the energy dissipation in function of displacement, you have here the slenderness wall strengthened with carbon fibers, and here the energy dissipation, total energy dissipation, and elastic one. For the same level of displacement, which is here, it's very interesting to see that we have a higher energy capacity of the wall, more than 10%, 10 to 20% increase in the energy capacity of the wall. It means that flax fibers are more suitable than carbon one for seismic strengthening issue. In order to compare if this kind of flax fibers may modify the way that we calculate the wall, we use a usual calculation method developed in, for example, Eurocode 8 part 3. What we have seen is that contribution of flax fibers maybe more or less calculate as for carbon ones, and that if you have the real mechanical properties of these fibers, you are able to calculate very precisely the experimental load capacity of this wall. So to conclude, flax fibers may be very interesting for shear strengthening of beams, and you can expect to have an increase of 10 to 35%, of course, depending on the existing structures. Flax fibers don't change the mechanical behavior of such beam. They can be calculated as usual, and so flax fibers may be more or less comparable to the one obtained by carbon. The mechanical properties just change. DIC method, as we've seen, is very interesting to investigate the strain localization and the strain value we can obtain on flax fibers. So flax fibers may be a very interesting alternative solution to use instead of carbon fibers in some specific area where we don't really need, for example, an important Young modulus, such as maybe in flexural strengthening or confinement, where maybe Young modulus is more important. It's some investigation we have to continue in the lab. Of course, those fibers are not perfect. There are still many questions about durability, fatigue, creep. We already have done some nice work on durability and creep, and they will be published soon. And it seems that, of course, there is a decrease in mechanical properties, but then it's not really a problem for the use of such fibers. So I would like to thank two of my PhD students. Main of the work presented today is part of their work is Nguyen Duc and Anne Allonet. They both worked on the flax fibers. Anne worked on the tensile properties and durability issue, and Duc works on the shear behavior. So thank you for your attention, and nice to have been able to promote this webinar for the IIFC. Thanks. Bye.